That explains why they pursued us so relentlessly, Lyra said quietly. It's not just about recovering Ilera anymore. It's about you too, the missing piece in their research. What did you do to the other subjects? Kale asked Ilera directly. I felt your intention through our connection. Ilera's expression remained solemn, but there was a hint of pride in her violet eyes. She reached for Kale's hand, and through their connection, she shared fragmented images, security protocols being rewritten, control parameters being altered, tracking systems being subtly corrupted. Not enough to free the subjects entirely, but enough to create cracks in Omnicorp's absolute control. She planted seeds, Lyra interpreted, watching the exchange. Small changes that will grow over time, giving the other subjects opportunities to resist their programming. They'll notice eventually, Kale pointed out. They'll conduct a full system audit after our intrusion. By then, the changes will have propagated too deeply to easily reverse, Lyra countered. She was very thorough. Ilera nodded in confirmation, though the effort of sharing these impressions had clearly drained her further. She leaned back against the cushions, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. Rest now, Lyra told her gently. You've done enough. When Ilera had fallen asleep, Kale and Lyra retreated to the cockpit to discuss their next steps. We can't go back to any known location, Kale stated as he checked their hyperspace trajectory. Omnicorp will have flagged all my previous haunts and any contacts associated with either of us. Agreed. We need somewhere completely new, Lyra said. Somewhere outside corporate jurisdiction entirely. The outer colonies? Kale suggested. Some of the more distant settlements operate with minimal corporate oversight. Lyra considered this. Maybe. Or we could try one of the independent habitats in the Kuiper Belt. They're self-sufficient, suspicious of corporate interference, and too scattered to patrol effectively. As they discussed options, a notification appeared on the ship's communication system, an encrypted message arriving through a secure relay. Kale accessed it cautiously, half expecting a trap or tracking attempt. Instead, they found a brief text communication from Dr. Thorne. Operation successful. Foundation laid. Seeds planted. Time to grow. Coordinates attached. He survived the raid on Xylos. Lyra breathed with evident relief. And he's offering us somewhere to go, Kale noted, examining the attached coordinates. This is far out, beyond Neptune, in a region with minimal traffic or monitoring. Do we trust it? Kale studied the encryption pattern of the message. It uses a verification sequence Thorne established before we left. It's legitimate. They set course for the coordinates, maintaining maximum stealth protocols throughout the journey. For 10 days, they traveled in hyperspace, emerging only briefly at calculated points to verify they weren't being pursued before jumping again. During this time, Ilera gradually recovered her strength. The exhaustion from her intense connection with Omnicorp's systems faded, replaced by a new sense of purpose. She spent hours with Kale, learning more about the Nomad systems, occasionally making subtle improvements that even he hadn't considered. Her communication also evolved. While still primarily nonverbal, her ability to project clear impressions through their connection strengthened. Sometimes Kale would receive not just feelings or images, but structured thoughts. Not quite words, but organized concepts that approximated language. They reached the coordinates Thorne had provided on the 12th day after leaving Europa. What they found surprised them. A small, self-contained habitat nestled within a hollowed-out asteroid, nearly invisible against the darkness of space unless one knew exactly where to look. A sanctuary, Lyra realized as they approached. Thorne must have established this as a refuge for Chimera subjects he hoped to rescue. The habitat's defensive systems scanned the Nomad thoroughly before granting approach clearance. They docked at a small but efficient port, where Thorne himself waited to greet them. "You made it," he said with evident relief when they disembarked. "When I heard about the security breach at Europa, I feared the worst." "It was close," Kale acknowledged, "but we got what we came for." Thorne led them into the habitat, a surprisingly comfortable facility with living quarters, research laboratories, and communal spaces. Most striking was the presence of others, men, women, and a few children, all with the distinctive violet eyes that mark them as Chimera subjects. Refugees from various Omnicorp facilities, Thorne explained, noting their surprised expressions. I've been helping them escape for years, though never anyone as significant as Alara. Alara stared at the other subjects with undisguised wonder. For the first time in her life, she was among others who shared her unique nature. People who could understand her experience in ways even Lyra and Kale could not. A young woman approached them, perhaps 20 years old, with the same violet eyes as Alara, but a more pronounced luminescence that suggested greater modification. "Welcome, little sister," she said gently. "We've been waiting for you." To everyone's astonishment, Alara responded verbally for the first time since they'd known her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and slightly raspy from disuse, but clear. Thorne smiled at their shocked expressions. The subjects can often communicate more easily with each other than with unmodified humans. They share a connection similar to what Alara established with you, Kale, but more intuitive. "How many are there?" Lyra asked, looking around at the small community. 23 now, including Alara, Thorne replied. All escaped from Omnicorp facilities over the past 5 years. Some show the instability typical of the project, but we've developed treatments that help maintain their cognitive balance. As Alara was introduced to the other subjects, Thorne drew Kale and Lyra aside to a private research area. His expression grew more serious. "What you found at Europa about your genetic contribution to the program has significant implications," he told Kale directly. "Your cousin didn't just use your DNA as a reference point. He identified specific markers that seemed to facilitate stable integration with the Chimera architecture." "Meaning what exactly?" Kale asked warily. "Meaning you carry a natural genetic predisposition for human-machine interface compatibility," Thorne explained. "Extremely rare, possibly unique. It's why Alara bonded with you so readily, and why Omnicorp has been trying to replicate your markers in their newer subjects." "Is that why she can communicate with me mentally?" "Partially. The connection works because your neurological patterns are naturally compatible with her interface abilities." Thorne brought up a display showing comparative genetic sequences. "What makes this truly remarkable is that it appears to be hereditary. Any biological children you might have would likely carry the same predisposition." The implications settled heavily on Kale. "So Omnicorp doesn't just want me for research. They want to establish a genetic line they can exploit for the program." "Precisely," Thorne confirmed grimly. "Which is why this sanctuary must remain absolutely secure. You're safe here for now, but eventually we may need to consider more permanent solutions." Over the following weeks, they settled into life within the sanctuary. Alara flourished among the other Chimera subjects, developing her abilities and, gradually, her verbal communication skills. Though still preferring to connect mentally, especially with Kale, she began speaking more regularly in short, deliberate sentences. Kale found purpose helping maintain the habitat systems and training some of the older subjects in practical skills like ship maintenance and navigation. These young people, despite their extraordinary abilities with technology, had spent most of their lives in Omnicorp facilities with little exposure to ordinary tasks. Lyra worked closely with Thorne, contributing her knowledge of Omnicorp's procedures and helping develop better treatments for the subjects with instability issues. Her background as a test subject herself gave her insights even Thorne lacked. One evening, several months after their arrival, Kale found Alara in the habitat's small observatory, a dome that offered a view of the star-filled void beyond their sanctuary. She sat cross-legged on the floor, staring up at the distant points of light with her characteristic intensity. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting beside her. Alara shook her head. "Thinking," she said simply, her voice stronger now with regular use, though still quiet. "About what?" Instead of answering verbally, she reached for his hand, sharing through their connection a complex web of impressions. The other subjects in the sanctuary, the remaining Chimera children still under Omnicorp's control, the changes she had planted in the Europa database, and a sense of approaching danger. "You think they'll find us eventually?" Kale interpreted. Alara nodded. "Not safe forever," she whispered. Need to be ready. The simple statement carried profound meaning. This child, who had endured so much, wasn't content with merely escaping her pursuers. She felt responsibility toward the others still trapped within the program, a determination to complete what she had begun in the quantum core. We'll be ready, Kale promised. Together, as he spoke the words, he realized how completely his life had transformed. The solitary salvager who had once bristled at responsibility now found himself at the center of a cause greater than himself, protector of a child who represented both the worst of corporate exploitation and the resilience of the human spirit. The door to the observatory slid open, and Lyra entered quietly. She had changed too over these months, the constant vigilance of life on the run giving way to purpose and determination. She sat on Alara's other side, completing their small circle. Dr. Thorne thinks he's found a way to extend the changes Alara made at Europa, she informed them. A targeted transmission that could strengthen the seeds she planted in the system. It wouldn't free everyone immediately, but it would accelerate the process. Is it safe? Kale asked. Would it expose our location? Not if we route it through multiple relays, Lyra explained. We'd need to move the habitat afterward as a precaution, but Thorne has already identified several potential locations. Alara listened to this exchange with intense focus, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight from above. Help them, she said firmly, her decision made. Later that night, after Alara had finally gone to sleep, Kale and Lyra stood alone in the habitat's small common area. The events of the past months hung between them. The dangers they'd faced, the trust they'd built, the family they'd become. I never expected any of this, Kale admitted quietly. When you showed up at Viridian Outpost with Alara, I thought my biggest problem was a missed payment. Lyra smiled. And I never expected to find someone willing to risk everything for a child they barely knew. She's special, Kale said simply. Not just because of what OmniCorp did to her, but because of who she is despite it. She could have used her abilities for herself, but instead, she's trying to save everyone else, Lyra finished, even at great risk to herself. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken eventually by Kale's hesitant question. What happens when this is over? If we succeed in undermining the Chimera project, if OmniCorp eventually falls or abandons the program, what then? Lyra considered this. I don't know if it ever truly ends. The world doesn't change that completely. But maybe we find a place where Alara can grow up with some normalcy, where she can choose her own path rather than having it dictated by what was done to her. Together, Kale asked, the question weighted with meaning beyond the simple word. Lyra met his gaze steadily. Together, she confirmed. She reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers in a gesture that held promise and commitment. As they stood there, contemplating an uncertain but shared future, Kale reflected on the strange path that had led him to this moment. A simple rescue mission years ago had created ripples that eventually returned to him in the form of a child with extraordinary abilities and an equally extraordinary spirit. She handed me the child, he murmured, remembering Lyra's words at their first reunion. You saved me years ago and left me with this. Regrets? Lyra asked softly. Kale shook his head, smiling. Not anymore. In the months and years that followed, their small family unit remained at the core of an expanding resistance against OmniCorp's Chimera project. The seeds Alara had planted in the Europa database grew as predicted, creating increasing instability in the corporation's control systems. More subjects escaped, finding their way to the sanctuary or to other safe havens established throughout the outer system. Some brought valuable intelligence, others brought specialized skills, but all brought the same determination to end the program that had created them. Alara continued to develop both her abilities and her identity beyond them. Under Thorne's guidance, and with Kale and Lyra's unwavering support, she learned to balance her extraordinary connection with technology against her growing sense of self. The quiet, solemn child gradually gave way to a thoughtful young person with a quiet strength and surprising sense of humor. The nomad remained their link to the outside world, now upgraded with technologies developed in collaboration with the other Chimera subjects. Kale still piloted missions when necessary, but always returned to the sanctuary, to Lyra and Alara, to the family he had never sought but now could not imagine living without. Omnicorp never abandoned its search entirely. Occasionally, pursuit ships would appear in distant sectors. Probe drones would sweep through areas where resistance activities had been detected. But the corporation's absolute control was crumbling, not just over the Chimera subjects, but over its own internal systems, compromised from within by Alara's modifications. On Alara's 10th birthday, a date they had arbitrarily established since her true birth records remained unknown, they stood together on the observation deck of their newest sanctuary habitat. This one orbited a distant moon in a system rarely traveled by corporate vessels, its existence known only to those within their expanding network. "Happy birthday," Kale said, presenting her with a small device he had constructed himself, a personal shield generator built to interface directly with her unique abilities. Alara accepted it with a bright smile, turning the device over in her hands and immediately understanding its function through her natural connection with technology. "Thank you," she said, her voice now clear and confident with years of practice. "It's perfect. There's more," Lyra added, producing a data chip. Information about a place, a colony on a terraformed moon beyond corporate space. Real sky, real ground, real weather. A school with other children, both like you, and conventional. Alara's eyes widened. "We're going there." "That's the plan," Kale confirmed. "Dr. Thorne has arranged everything. It's time you had something closer to a normal childhood, at least for a while." "What about the others?" Alara asked, concern evident in her voice. "The ones still at Omnicorp." "The work continues," Lyra assured her. "But you deserve a life beyond just resistance and hiding." "We all do." Alara considered this, her violet eyes thoughtful. Then she nodded decisively. "A new beginning," she said, reaching for both their hands. As they stood together, looking out at the vast expanse of space that had been both their prison and their path to freedom, Kale reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From reluctant rescuer to dedicated guardian, from solitary survivor to part of something meaningful. The future remained uncertain. Omnicorp still existed. The Chimera Project continued in some form, and dangers would always persist for those with abilities corporations sought to control. But for now, in this moment, they had carved out something precious amid the chaos. A family forged through adversity, strengthened by choice rather than circumstance. Alara's grip tightened on his hand, and through their enduring connection, Kale felt her projection of a single, powerful impression: belonging. Not just the belonging of a child to parents or of one person to another, but the deeper belonging of finding one's place in a vast and often hostile universe. "Together," she said simply, echoing the promise they had made countless times over the years. Together, Kale and Lyra confirmed in unison, as the stars stretched out before them, infinite in their possibility. The central database room was a marvel of engineering, a circular chamber with a pillar of pulsing blue light at its center, surrounded by curved workstations. The light column contained countless quantum processors working in perfect synchronization, processing and storing the sum total of Omnicorp's most valuable research. No personnel present, Kale noted with relief as they entered the chamber. The diagnostic must have scheduled maintenance for after the cycle. Lyra immediately moved to one of the workstations. "We need direct access to interface with the quantum core. These terminals are just basic monitoring stations." Kale examined the central column, finding a recessed panel near its base. "There, that looks like a primary maintenance access point." They approached the panel cautiously. Unlike the utilitarian interfaces they'd encountered elsewhere in the facility, this was sleek, minimalist, a smooth surface with only a single biometric scanner visible. "This is it," Lyra whispered, helping Alara position herself before the panel. "This is where we need your special connection." Alara stared at the panel with intense concentration, her violet eyes reflecting the pulsing blue light of the quantum processors. She reached out slowly, placing her small hand against the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel illuminated with complex patterns of light that seemed to float around Alara's fingertips like water. The scanner hadn't just accepted her touch. It was responding to it, interacting with her in ways it hadn't been designed to do. The blue light of the central column intensified, patterns of energy flowing more rapidly as Alara established her connection. Kale felt a strange sensation through their link, a vast expansion of awareness, as if Alara's consciousness had suddenly stretched to encompass enormous quantities of information. "She's in," Lyra confirmed, watching data patterns flow across a nearby monitoring station. The system recognizes her as a Chimera subject, but it's confused by her stable integration patterns. It's treating her as an authorized research interface. "How long do we have?" Kale asked, keeping watch on the chamber entrance. "Hard to say. Once she locates the tracking protocols, maybe 2 or 3 minutes to modify them." Lyra's fingers hovered near the monitoring station, not touching but following the data flow. "She's navigating faster than I can track, following pathways through the system that shouldn't even be possible." Through his connection with Alara, Kale sensed her, moving through the vast network, not randomly, but with purpose, following threads of information that led deeper into OmniCorp's most guarded secrets. She was searching for her own signature, the unique patterns that allowed them to track her across space. Suddenly, the flow of data on the monitoring station changed, displaying what appeared to be biological profiles, the Chimera subjects. Dozens of them, far more than Thorne had indicated, each with detailed genetic modifications and neural interface specifications. "There are so many," Lyra whispered in horror. "They've expanded the program beyond anything we imagined." Alara had found her own profile, her small face expressionless as she viewed the genetic codes and neural patterns that defined her existence in OmniCorp systems. Through their connection, Kale felt not fear or anger, but a strange determination as she began to alter the tracking protocols. 9 minutes left, Kale reminded them, growing increasingly uneasy. The chamber felt too exposed, too central to the facility's operations to remain undetected for long. Alara worked with methodical precision, erasing specific markers from her profile while leaving others intact, preserving the appearance of a complete record while removing the elements that allowed active tracking. But as she delved deeper into the system, her expression changed subtly. "What's wrong?" Lyra asked, noticing the shift. Instead of answering, Alara's free hand reached for Kale, grasping his wrist firmly. Immediately, he felt a flood of information pouring through their connection. Images, data, coordinates, too much to process all at once. "She's found something," he managed to say as the information continued to flow. "Something about the other subjects and about me." Lyra looked alarmed. "What do you mean about you?" Before Kale could answer, a subtle change in the room's lighting caught his attention, a shift from standard illumination to a slightly redder hue. A security measure activating outside the normal diagnostic cycle. "Something's wrong," he warned, drawing his blaster. "We need to finish and go." Alara's grip on his wrist tightened, her eyes now blazing with violet light as she forced a specific set of images through their connection. Kale saw a familiar face, his cousin Elias Vance, the project director, alongside genetic profiles that shared markers with his own DNA. "They used my genetic material," he realized with growing horror, "from an EMP device I left behind. They've been incorporating it into all the new subjects, trying to replicate the stability Alara developed. That's why they want you both." Lyra understood immediately. Not just to recapture Alara, but to study the source material directly. An alarm suddenly blared throughout the chamber, the lighting shifting fully to emergency red. On the monitoring station, a security protocol activated. Unauthorized access detected. Containment measures initiated. "We're out of time," Kale shouted over the alarm. "Alara, we have to go." But Alara remained connected to the system, her eyes fixed on the quantum core as data continued to flow between them. Through their link, Kale sensed her grim determination. She hadn't just found her tracking protocols. she discovered the command architecture for the entire Chimera project. She's trying to free the others, Lyra realized, watching the data patterns shift rapidly across the monitors. She's rewriting their control parameters. There's no time, Kale insisted, hearing the distant sound of security teams mobilizing. Elara, please. With visible reluctance, Elara finally withdrew her hand from the access panel. The moment she broke contact, the quantum core's light pulsed erratically, as if disturbed by her intrusion. She swayed slightly, exhausted by the intense connection, and Kale lifted her into his arms without hesitation. Did she finish? He asked Lyra as they moved toward the exit. The tracking protocols are neutralized, Lyra confirmed, but I don't know how much she managed to change for the other subjects. They reached the central core lift just as the security lockdown began sealing compartments throughout the level. The doors nearly closed on them as they squeezed inside, Jax's quantum key duplicator barely convincing the system to accept their exit command. Security teams at levels 4 through 6, Lyra reported, monitoring an emergency display in the lift. They're converging on the database level we just left. We can't go back the way we came, Kale decided. Too many checkpoints. He studied the lift controls. Maintenance level 3, that should connect to the service tunnels we used to enter. The lift responded to the command, but moved slower than before. Security protocols were already limiting functionality throughout the facility. When the doors finally opened, they faced a utilitarian corridor similar to those they'd navigated earlier, but now bathed in pulsing red emergency lighting. This way, Kale directed, still carrying Elara as they moved swiftly through the maintenance level. The child's eyes were half closed, her consciousness partially withdrawn after the intense connection with the quantum core. They encountered no personnel for the first few hundred meters. This level was primarily automated, with robotic systems handling the routine maintenance of the facility's extensive life support infrastructure. But as they approached a junction leading to the outer perimeter, the sound of booted feet echoed from an adjacent corridor. "Security team," Lyra whispered, pressing against the wall beside Kale. "At least 4 of them." With no time to find an alternate route, Kale made a quick decision. He set Elara down carefully and withdrew Jax's emergency countermeasures chip from his pocket. "This should trigger a system-wide diagnostic cascade," he explained, activating the device. "It won't last long, but it might create enough confusion for us to reach the exit point." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the facility, systems began shutting down and restarting in random sequences. Lights flickered, doors cycled open and closed, and automated announcements contradicted each other over the communication system. The approaching security team halted, their communications suddenly filled with conflicting orders. "Now," Kale urged, gathering Elara again as they rushed past the junction. The security team, distracted by the chaos in their command channels, failed to notice the 3 figures disappearing down a side corridor. They reached the outer maintenance tunnels with security alerts still blaring behind them. Here, the emergency was less pronounced. These systems were too peripheral to warrant priority attention during a core breach. They moved quickly through the narrow passages, retracing their route toward the surface access point. Almost there, Lyra encouraged as they approached the vertical shaft that would lead them back to Europa's surface. Just a little further. As they began their ascent, the facility's systems gradually stabilized. Jax's countermeasures were effective but temporary. By the time they reached the surface access panel, normal operations would be resuming throughout the complex. The panel slid aside, revealing Europa's frozen landscape once more. They emerged cautiously, scanning for pursuit, but the surface remained eerily peaceful. The chaos was still contained within the facility below. "We need to move quickly," Kale urged, adjusting Elara in his arms. The child had regained some awareness, but remained drained from her efforts. Security protocols will include surface patrols once they establish what was accessed. They made their way back toward the hidden shuttle, moving as fast as Europa's low gravity would safely allow. The ice crunched beneath their boots, each step sending them slightly higher than intended, requiring careful control to maintain their course. They were halfway to the shuttle when Lyra's scanner detected movement behind them. "Patrol drones," she warned. "3 units, following our heat signatures." The drones were fast and highly maneuverable, designed specifically for Europa's challenging environment. Within minutes, they would overtake the fleeing group. "Get to the shuttle," Kale instructed, handing Ilera to Lyra. "Start the launch sequence. I'll hold them off." Before Lyra could protest, Kale had drawn his blaster and taken position behind an ice formation. The drones appeared moments later, sleek, disc-shaped machines equipped with both scanning and offensive capabilities. Kale waited until they were within range, then fired in rapid succession. The first drone exploded in a shower of components, but the others immediately took evasive action, splitting to approach from different angles. A pulse of energy struck the ice near Kale's position, sending fragments flying in the low gravity. He rolled to a new position, firing again and clipping one of the remaining drones. It spiraled out of control, crashing into the surface some distance away. The final drone proved more challenging, keeping its distance while continuing to track his movements. As Kale prepared for another shot, the drone suddenly veered off course, its systems sputtering before it plummeted to the surface. Turning, Kale saw Ilera standing a short distance away, one hand extended toward the fallen drone, her violet eyes glowing even through her helmet visor. Despite her exhaustion, she had reached out to disable the final pursuer. "I told you to get to the shuttle," Kale admonished gently as he reached her side. The impression that came through their connection was simple but resolute. "We stay together." They reached the shuttle without further incident, quickly completing the launch sequence. As they ascended from Europa's surface, the facility behind them had returned to apparent normalcy. Only the wreckage of the security drones indicating anything had transpired. Setting course for rendezvous with the Nomad, Lyra announced, her fingers flying over the navigation controls. No pursuit signatures detected yet. Kale finally allowed himself to relax slightly, securing Ilera in an acceleration couch designed for emergency evacuations. The child looked pale and drawn, the strain of her connection with Omnicorp's systems evident in her exhausted features. "You did well," he told her softly. "More than we asked, more than anyone could have expected." A weak smile crossed Ilera's face, perhaps the first genuine smile he had seen from her. Through their connection, he felt not just her fatigue, but also a profound satisfaction. She had accomplished what she set out to do, both for herself and, in some measure, for the other subjects still trapped within Omnicorp's control. The shuttle docked with the Nomad without incident, and they quickly transferred aboard the larger vessel. Within minutes, they had broken orbit and were accelerating away from Europa, setting course for the outer system where they could more easily lose themselves among the scattered outposts and mining operations. Only when they were safely in hyperspace did Kale finally address what had happened in the database chamber. "You accessed more than just your tracking protocols," he said to Ilera as she sat wrapped in a thermal blanket in the common area. "You found information about me, about my connection to the project." Ilera nodded solemnly, her eyes meeting his with a directness that conveyed her understanding of the significance. "My cousin Elias," Kale continued, the name bitter on his tongue. "He used my genetic material to stabilize the newer subjects. That explains why they've hashtag," she handed him the child. "You saved me years ago and left me with this." Kale. Vance tightened his grip on the contraband package as he navigated through the dimly lit corridors of Viridian Outpost. The station's recycled air smelled of oil, sweat, and desperation, since he'd grown accustomed to over years of scraping Bion society's edges. The outpost hung in the thin zone between lawlessness and civilization, nestled within a dense asteroid belt rarely patrolled by authorities. Perfect for deals like this. Just drop off the goods, collect payment, and leave, he muttered to himself, eyes scanning for trouble. Simple job, easy money, no complications. A sharp laugh escaped him. When had anything in his life been without complications? His comm unit buzzed. Package confirmed. Payment transfer initiated. Clean exit available through maintenance shaft C7, a distorted voice announced. Kale grunted acknowledgement and changed direction. The worn soles of his boots made little sound against the metal grating. Years of surviving on the fringes had taught him to move like a shadow, to exist without being seen. It served him well as a salvager and occasional bounty hunter when money ran tight. His ship, the Nomad, waited in docking Bay 17, a reliable vessel despite its patchwork appearance and outdated technology. It had gotten him out of more scrapes than he cared to remember, including that disaster at the Omnicorp research facility 5 years ago. The memory flashed uninvited. Alarms blaring, blood on sterile white floors, a woman's desperate face as he pulled her from the rubble. He pushed the thought away. The past was the past. He'd done his good deed for the decade. As he neared the maintenance shaft, a prickling sensation crawled up his spine, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Kale slowed, hand drifting to the blaster concealed beneath his jacket. The corridor ahead appeared empty, but shadows could hide anything. You always did have good instincts. The voice came from behind him, soft yet commanding, familiar in a way that made his stomach clench. Kale turned slowly, keeping his hand near his weapon. She stood 10 paces away, partially hidden in shadow. Her once vibrant red hair was now cropped short, streaked with premature silver. The softness he remembered in her face had hardened into angles and determination. She wore practical, worn clothing, a dark jacket with too many pockets, pants reinforced at the knees, and boots that had seen better days. But it was her eyes that confirmed her identity. The same intense green that had stared up at him from a blood-smeared face as he'd carried her to safety. Lyra, he said, the name strange on his tongue after so many years. She stepped forward, and Kale noticed she wasn't alone. A small figure gripped her hand, a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. A girl with dark hair that fell in waves around his solemn face. But her eyes, Kale felt a jolt of unease. The child's eyes were an unnatural violet that seemed to pulse slightly in the dim light of the corridor, reacting to the technology around them. "What do you want?" Kale asked, though he already knew this wasn't a coincidence. Nothing ever was. Lyra guided the child forward. "This is Alara." The girl stared at Kale with unsettling intensity, as if she could see through his skin to the organs beneath. "You saved me years ago," Lyra said, her voice tight with emotion, "and left me with this." She pushed the girl gently toward him. Kale took an instinctive step back. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what I said." Lyra's expression hardened further. "Omnicorp hasn't stopped hunting me since that day. Alara is what they were creating at the facility, what they're still trying to recreate. And your actions made her possible." "My actions?" Kale's voice rose in disbelief. "I pulled you out of a burning building. That's it. Whatever this is," he gestured at the child, "has nothing to do with me." The girl, Alara, continued to stare at him, head tilted slightly as if listening to a frequency beyond human hearing. "You don't understand," Lyra began, but the conversation halted as the distant sound of boots on metal echoed down the corridor. Kale's comm unit crackled. "Security breach in Sector 4. All docking bays locked down. Suspected corporate fugitives." "Omnicorp," Lyra whispered, pulling Alara close. "They found us." "That's your problem," Kale said, turning toward the maintenance shaft. His escape route was still viable if he moved quickly. "They know you were there too," Lyra called after him. "They have your DNA signature from the EMP device you left behind. If they find me, they find you. And believe me, they won't care that you were just passing through." Kale stopped, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. He'd used a custom EMP device during the rescue, one he'd built himself. If Omnicorp had recovered it. "Besides," Lyra added, her voice softer now, "she's connected to you. Somehow, the energy signature from your device altered the experiment. You're in her genetic makeup, Kale. She responds to you." As if to prove the point, Alara pulled away from Lyra and walked toward Kale with deliberate steps. When she reached him, she looked up, those unnerving violet eyes blinking once, twice. Then she reached out and took his hand. Kale felt it immediately, a strange tingling sensation like a weak electric current passing between them. The child's expression didn't change, but Kale could have sworn he felt something brush against his consciousness, like a question without words. The sound of boots grew louder. "Damn it," Kale muttered, pulling his hand away from the child. The payment for his drop-off would be locked in the system with the security alert. His mission was already blown. "Fine. My ship's this way. But this is temporary. You hear me? Just until we're clear of this station." Lyra nodded, relief visible on her face. "That's all I'm asking. For now." They moved quickly through the maintenance tunnel, emerging 2 levels down from the docking bay. Kale took point. Lyra positioned herself behind Alara, protecting the child from both directions. Security teams have been deployed to all major intersections, Kale said, checking a datapad pulled from his jacket. "We'll have to go through the commercial sector." The commercial sector buzzed with activity despite the security alert. Merchants hawked their wares, smugglers conducted business behind flimsy privacy screens, and station residents went about their lives, deliberately ignoring the increased security presence. Perfect cover for 3 people trying to avoid attention. They were halfway through when Alara stumbled, her eyes suddenly glowing brighter. She grabbed Kale's jacket. "What's wrong with her?" he hissed at Lyra. "She senses something," Lyra answered, scanning their surroundings. "She can detect Omnicorp tech. Special frequency they use." As if on cue, a small drone buzzed overhead, its scanning beam sweeping methodically through the crowd. Not station security. This was sleeker, more advanced. "Corporate tech. Down," Kale ordered, pulling them into the shadow of a food stall. The drone passed overhead, its beam missing them by inches. "They're using search patterns," Lyra whispered. "They know we're here." Kale swore under his breath. 2 more sections to the docking bay. They continued through the crowd, moving as quickly as they dared without drawing attention. Kale noticed Alara walking with her head tilted again, as if listening. Occasionally, she would tug his sleeve, changing their course slightly, just before a drone or security officer appeared. The child, he realized. She's sensing them before we see them. Lyra nodded grimly. "Now do you understand why Omnicorp wants her back?" They reached the final corridor to the docking bay when Alara suddenly froze, her small frame tensing. Ahead, 2 men in nondescript clothing stood watching the flow of foot traffic. Nothing in their appearance screamed corporate security, but their posture and alertness set them apart from the station's usual inhabitants. "Omnicorp contractors," Lyra whispered. "Elite retrieval team." Kale quickly assessed their options. No alternate route. No way to blend in on this sparse corridor. "We'll have to fight through." "I was hoping you'd say that," Lyra replied, her hand already reaching into her jacket to produce a compact stunner. Kale moved first, approaching with the natural stride of someone with legitimate business. When the first agent turned toward him, Kale was already in motion. A swift strike to the throat, followed by a knee to the abdomen. The man dropped with barely a sound. The second agent was quicker, reaching for what was undoubtedly a weapon. But before he could draw, Lyra's stunner discharged with a soft hum. The man's body convulsed briefly before collapsing. "Not bad for someone on the run," Kale commented, grabbing the agent's access card. "I've had practice," she replied without humor. They reached docking bay 17 without further incident. The Nomad waited, its hull scarred and patched, but to Kale, it was the most beautiful sight in the station. He swiped the stolen access card, overriding the lockdown protocols, and the entry ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss. "Get in," he ordered, taking position to cover their boarding. Lyra ushered Alara up the ramp first, then followed. Kale backed in slowly, scanning for pursuit. Just as the ramp began to close, he spotted a team of security personnel rushing into the docking bay, weapons raised. "Strap in," Kale shouted, racing for the cockpit. The familiar environment of his ship centered him, muscle memory taking over as he initiated the launch sequence. The Nomad's engines growled to life, vibrating through the deck plates. Warning lights flashed as the station's automated defense systems targeted them. Kale's fingers flew over the controls, bypassing safety protocols and diverting power to shields and engines. "They've locked the docking clamps," he announced as Lyra entered the cockpit, Illyra close behind. "Can we break free?" Lyra asked, buckling into the co-pilot's seat without being told. Kale grinned, a fierce expression with little humor. The Nomad's had a few tricks. He flipped a series of switches, and the ship shuddered as auxiliary thrusters engaged. Metal screamed against metal as the ship strained against its restraints. Warning alerts blared through the cockpit. Kale pushed the thrusters to maximum, and with a final metallic groan, the docking clamps gave way. The Nomad lurched forward, free of the station. "Hold on," Kale called out as he executed a sharp turn, diving toward the asteroid belt. Station defense turrets opened fire, energy bolts glancing off their shields. The ship shook violently. "Shields at 60%, Lyra reported, adapting quickly to the ship's unfamiliar systems. Kale navigated through the dense field of asteroids with practiced precision, using the larger rocks as cover from the station's weapons. Within minutes, they had disappeared into the belt, the station's signals growing fainter behind them. When they were safely hidden within the asteroid field, Kale engaged the autopilot and swiveled his chair to face his unexpected passengers. Lyra looked exhausted, the adrenaline of their escape fading to leave dark circles under her eyes more prominent. Illyra sat quietly in a jump seat, those strange eyes taking in every detail of the cockpit. "Start talking," Kale demanded. "And this time I want the whole story." The recycled air aboard the Nomad tasted stale despite the filtration systems working at full capacity. The ship wasn't designed for 3 people, especially not for extended periods. The single cabin, cramped common area, and cockpit suddenly seemed impossibly small with Lyra and Illyra aboard. Kale watched the child explore the common area with unnerving attentiveness, her slight fingers tracing circuit panels and interface screens with unexpected familiarity. She hadn't spoken a single word since coming aboard, but her eyes followed everything, especially him. "She doesn't talk much," Lyra explained, noticing his observation. "Not in the conventional way, at least." "What does that mean?" Kale asked, crossing his arms as he leaned against the bulkhead. Lyra sighed, running a hand through her short hair. "It's complicated." Omnicorp's Chimera project was attempting to create a direct human-machine interface. Not just neural implants or augmentations, but a fundamental rewiring of human cognition to communicate with technology on its most basic level. "And she's the result?" Kale nodded toward Illyra, who had moved to the navigation console and was staring intently at the star map displayed there. "She's more than that. She's what they didn't expect." Lyra lowered her voice. "The interface works both ways. She doesn't just understand technology, she can influence it, control it sometimes." As if on cue, the star map display flickered, zooming in on a distant sector without anyone touching the controls. Illyra continued staring at it, her head tilted in that now familiar angle. "That's unsettling," Kale muttered. "It's why they want her back so badly." Lyra moved closer to him, speaking in hushed tones. "But here's where you come in. During the escape, when you used that custom EMP device to shut down security, something happened. The energy signature interfered with the experimental matrix they were using. And when you helped me out, you were bleeding." Kale unconsciously touched the scar on his forearm, a jagged line where a piece of metal had sliced through his sleeve during the rescue. "Your blood, your DNA, mixed with components of the experiment," Lyra continued. "When Illyra was born, completed, whatever term applies, she carried markers from that interaction. She's keyed to your genetic signature. She can sense you, respond to you in ways she doesn't with others." Kale shook his head in disbelief. "That sounds like pseudoscientific garbage. I'm no geneticist, but DNA doesn't work that way." "This wasn't conventional genetics," Lyra countered. "This was cutting-edge biotechnology combined with quantum computing. They were breaking fundamental rules of both biology and physics. And you expect me to believe I'm what? Her father?" Kale scoffed. "Not exactly. More like a reference point, a stabilizing factor in her development." Lyra glanced at Alara, who had now moved away from the navigation console and was examining the ship's environmental controls. She's been drawn to technology that bears similarities to your EMP device. She can find pathways through systems that echo your design architecture. Kale fell silent, watching the child. As improbable as it sounded, he couldn't deny the strange sensation he'd felt when she touched him, or the way she seemed to navigate through the station's security almost instinctively. "So what's your plan?" he finally asked. "I could drop you at the nearest neutral port. Plenty of places that don't ask questions." "That won't work," Lyra said, shaking her head. "We've tried hiding. Omnicorp always finds us. Their tracking technology is too advanced." "Then what do you want from me?" "I've heard rumors of a place called Xylos. It's a neutral planet in the outer systems, known for harboring corporate refugees. I have a contact there who might be able to help us, someone who understands what Omnicorp is doing and has the resources to protect us, or at least hide us better." Kale laughed bitterly. "Of course you do. And let me guess, you need my ship to get there?" "More than that," Lyra met his gaze steadily. "I need you. Alara needs you. Without you, even if we reach Xylos, I don't know if my contact can help us. You're linked to her development in ways I don't fully understand." Before Kale could respond, the ship's proximity alarm blared. He rushed to the cockpit, Lyra close behind. On the scanner, 3 fast-moving signatures approached through the asteroid field. Omnicorp pursuit vessels. Lyra identified immediately. Hydra-class interceptors. "How the hell did they find us so quickly?" Kale demanded, already powering up the engines. "I told you, their tracking technology is advanced. They might be keyed to Alara's unique energy signature." Kale swore as he took manual control of the Nomad, weaving through the asteroid field with practiced precision. The interceptors followed, their sleek forms visible now through the viewport, black against the gray of the asteroids. "They're faster than us," Kale noted grimly as he pushed the ship's engines harder. "But probably not as maneuverable," Lyra countered, strapping into the co-pilot's seat. "These corporate ships are designed for straight-line speed." Kale nodded, a plan forming. "Hang on." He banked the Nomad sharply toward a dense cluster of asteroids, some as large as small moons. The ship groaned under the strain of the tight turn, but responded to his commands. The interceptors adjusted course to follow, their superior engines closing the gap rapidly. "They're charging weapons," Lyra warned, reading the sensor data. The first shots streaked past the Nomad, energy bolts illuminating the darkness of space. Kale zigzagged between asteroids, using the larger ones as shields against the barrage. A warning light flashed on the console as the Nomad's shields absorbed a glancing hit. "Shields at 40%, Lyra announced, diverting power from non-essential systems to reinforce them. Kale guided the ship deeper into the asteroid field, where the rocks grew denser and navigation became increasingly treacherous. The interceptors followed, but their pilots showed more caution now, slowing to navigate the dangerous terrain. "We can't outrun them forever," Kale said through gritted teeth as he narrowly avoided a collision with a tumbling asteroid. A small sound from behind made them both turn. Alara stood in the cockpit doorway, her violet eyes glowing brighter than before. She walked toward the console with purpose, ignoring Lyra's. "Command to strap in." "Alara, what are you?" Lyra began, but fell silent as the child placed her hands on the navigation interface. The ship's lights flickered momentarily. The display screens blurred, data streams shifting and reorganizing without Kale's input. The Nomad's engine note changed, becoming smoother, more efficient. "What's she doing?" Kale asked, feeling the ship respond differently to his controls. Lighter, more responsive. "I don't know exactly," Lyra answered, watching in fascination. "But I think she's optimizing the ship's systems, communicating with it directly." A proximity alert sounded. One of the interceptors had closed to firing range again. Kale prepared to execute another evasive maneuver, but before he could act, Alara's fingers danced across a secondary control panel. The Nomad suddenly released a burst of electromagnetic energy that wasn't part of its standard systems, similar to the EMP device Kale had used years ago, but more refined. The nearest interceptor's systems visibly faltered, its running lights flickering out as it drifted off course, narrowly missing an asteroid. How did she, Kale began, but Alara was already moving to another console. The ship's scanners recalibrated, highlighting a narrow passage through the asteroid field that the sensors hadn't detected before, a natural tunnel through one of the largest asteroids. I think she wants us to go there, Lyra said, pointing to the new route. Kale hesitated only briefly before adjusting course. Hold on. The Nomad shot toward the opening, barely wide enough for the ship to pass through. Behind them, the remaining interceptors opened fire, but the shots went wide as Kale pushed the ship into the narrow passage. Darkness enveloped them as the Nomad entered the asteroid tunnel. Kale relied on the ship's sensors and his own instincts to navigate the twisting path. Alara remained at the console, her eyes providing an eerie violet glow in the dimmed cockpit. When they emerged on the other side, Kale immediately executed a series of random jumps, taking them further from the asteroid field and the disabled interceptor. Only when the scanner showed no pursuit did he engage the autopilot and turn to the child still standing by the console. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and unease. Alara didn't answer verbally. Instead, she turned those unsettling eyes on him, and Kale felt that same strange connection, stronger this time, almost like words forming in his mind that weren't his own thoughts. Impressions of patterns, systems, and escape routes. She showed the ship what to do, Lyra explained softly, using the concept from your EMP design, but adapted to the Nomad systems. Kale stared at the child, then at the console where she'd worked her inexplicable magic. "That's impossible. That's Chimera," Lyra countered. "That's why Omnicorp will never stop hunting her." She placed a protective hand on Alara's shoulder. "And now you understand why we need your help. We can't just run forever. We need to find a permanent solution." Kale leaned back in his chair, mind racing. His simple job had evolved into something far beyond his expectations, entangling him with corporate conspiracies and a child with abilities that defied explanation. Yet something about Alara's silent plea resonated with him, perhaps the connection Lyra described, or perhaps something deeper. "Set course for Xylos," he finally said, the decision settling into place with unexpected rightness. "Let's see what your contact can do for us." Alara's violet eyes seemed to brighten just slightly, and Kale could have sworn he felt a whisper of gratitude brush against his consciousness. The journey to Xylos took nearly a week through hyperspace, forcing the three unlikely companions into close quarters for far longer than Kale had anticipated. The Nomad, designed for solo operation with occasional short-term passengers, struggled to accommodate their needs. Water had to be rationed, and the ship's food synthesizer strained to produce adequate nutrition for 3 people. Despite these challenges, a routine gradually emerged. Kale focused on piloting and maintaining the ship, occasionally making minor course corrections to avoid well-traveled shipping lanes where Omnicorp might have monitoring outposts. Lyra took responsibility for Alara, but also proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the Nomad systems, helping Kale repair damage sustained during their escape. And Alara, the child remained an enigma. She rarely slept more than a few hours at a time, spending her waking hours exploring every inch of the ship. Sometimes Kale would find her sitting cross-legged before an open-access panel, staring at the circuitry within as if reading a book. Other times, she would stand at the viewport for hours, watching the distorted starlight of hyperspace with unblinking focus. On the 3rd day, as Kale was performing maintenance on the ship's cooling systems, he felt a now-familiar presence behind him. He turned to find Alara watching him work, head tilted in that peculiar angle. "Want to help?" he asked, surprising himself at the offer. Alara approached without hesitation. Kale handed her a small calibration tool, demonstrating how to adjust the coolant flow valves. To his astonishment, after watching just once, she perfectly replicated his movements on the next valve, then proceeded to calibrate the remaining ones with greater precision than he could have achieved. "You're good with your hands," he commented. Alara didn't smile, but her eyes brightened briefly. It was the closest thing to a normal child's reaction he'd seen from her. Later that evening, as Lyra prepared their meal from the synthesizer's limited options, Cale broached the subject that had been bothering him since their escape. "You still haven't told me everything about Chimera," he said, "or about your contact on Xylos." Lyra sighed, setting down the food packets. "What would you like to know? Let's start with who's running Chimera now. Who's hunting you so aggressively?" "Dr. Elias Vance is the project director," Lyra replied, watching Cale carefully. "Any relation?" Cale's jaw tightened. "A distant cousin. We're not close." "That explains some things," Lyra murmured. "The genetic compatibility, perhaps." "What else aren't you telling me?" Cale pressed. Lyra hesitated, glancing at Alara, who was engrossed in a technical manual she'd found in a storage compartment. "Alara isn't the only success they've had. There are others, earlier prototypes, less stable, but still viable. Chimera isn't just about human-machine interface anymore. It's evolved into something more ambitious. Which is control," Lyra said simply. "Not just of machines, but of entire systems. Networks. Infrastructure. Imagine having operatives who could shut down a planet's defense grid with a thought, or redirect surveillance satellites, or access any secure database without leaving a trace." Cale let the implications sink in. Corporate warfare taken to a new level. Exactly. And beyond corporations to governments, independent colonies, anyone with resources Omnicorp wants to control. Lyra lowered her voice further. "But there's a problem with their creations. The more powerful they become, the less controllable they are. The human element, free will, emotion, conscience, it interferes with their programmed objectives." "Except Alara," Cale guessed. Lyra nodded. "She's different. Stable. Balanced. They don't know why, but it has something to do with what happened during our escape with you. That's why they want both of you. And your contact on Xylos? How do they fit into this?" "Dr. Eris Thorne," Lyra revealed. "He was one of the original architects of Chimera before it took its current direction. He left when he realized what Omnicorp intended to do with the technology. He's been helping refugees from their programs ever since, operating from Xylos because of its unusual shielding properties." Cale absorbed this information, his gaze drifting to Alara. "And what does Thorne want with her?" "Protection, primarily, but also understanding. Alara is unique, the first Chimera subject to develop a true symbiotic relationship with technology rather than a parasitic or controlling one. She doesn't just command systems, she communicates with them. Thorne believes this could be the key to developing the technology ethically." Before Cale could respond, the ship's proximity alarm sounded, a different tone from the pursuit warning, indicating they were approaching a navigational hazard. He hurried to the cockpit, finding a massive radiation storm directly in their path. "We'll have to go around," he announced as Lyra joined him. "It'll add at least a day to our journey." Alara appeared in the doorway, her attention fixed on the swirling clouds of radiation visible through the viewport. She approached the navigation console decisively. "What is it?" Lyra asked her. "Do you see something?" Instead of responding, Alara placed her hands on the console. The displays flickered, data streams reorganizing as they had during their escape from the interceptors. A new course plotted itself, directly through the radiation storm. "That's not possible," Cale objected. "The radiation levels would fry our systems, not to mention us." Alara's eyes glowed brighter as she turned to look at him. Again, that strange sense of communication without words brushed against his mind. Impressions of shields, frequencies, and pathways. "I think she's saying she can protect the ship," Lyra interpreted, watching the child closely. "She can modulate our shield frequencies to disperse the radiation." Cale shook his head. "That's theoretical technology. The military has been working on adaptive radiation shields for decades without success." Yet even as he protested, he felt a certainty emanating from Alara. Not pride or bravado, but simple knowledge. She knew she could do this. "It's your ship," Lyra said. "Your call." Cale studied the child's unwavering gaze, then the radiation storm that would cost them precious time they might not have. "Fine." But at the first sign of trouble, we revert to my course. He engaged the engines, following the path Alara had charted. As they approached the edge of the storm, Alara's fingers moved across the shield controls with impossible speed and precision. The ship's energy field visibly changed, the typical blue glow taking on a pulsing, iridescent quality. The Nomad entered the radiation storm, and Kale tensed, expecting alarms to sound as the radiation penetrated their defenses. Instead, the ship sailed smoothly through the chaotic energy, the shields dispersing the radiation exactly as Alara had somehow promised. "Incredible," Lyra whispered, watching the displays that showed radiation levels remaining within safe parameters despite the maelstrom outside. Throughout the journey through the storm, Alara remained at the console, making minute adjustments to the shield modulation as the radiation density and type changed. Her focus never wavered, even as hours passed. When they finally emerged from the other side, having cut directly through the storm rather than circumnavigating it, Alara's hands slipped from the console. For the first time, Kale saw fatigue in her small frame as she slumped slightly. Lyra immediately went to her, helping her to a seat. "That took a lot out of her," she explained to Kale. "Using her abilities this intensely always does." Kale studied the navigation display. "She saved us nearly 2 days' journey." He turned to look at the exhausted child. "Thank you." Alara's violet eyes met his, and this time, the impression that came to his mind was simpler, a sense of satisfaction, of being useful. It was such a human feeling that Kale found himself smiling reflexively. "Rest," he told her. "I'll handle things from here." As Lyra led Alara away to recover, Kale remained in the cockpit, contemplating what he had witnessed. The child's abilities far exceeded what Lyra had described. This wasn't just communication with technology. This was a fundamental understanding of physics and energy that most scientists could only theorize about. And somehow, according to Lyra, he had played a role in making Alara what she was. The thought was both disturbing and strangely compelling. By the time they reached Xylos 3 days later, Kale had made a decision. He would see this through, not just to Thorn, but beyond if necessary. Whatever his inadvertent role in Alara's creation, he now felt a responsibility toward her that he couldn't ignore. Xylos loomed in the viewport, a world unlike any Kale had visited before. From orbit, its surface appeared to be covered in massive, luminescent fungal forests, their glow visible even from space. Between these forests, deep canyons carved by ferocious winds created natural barriers that had helped keep the planet relatively isolated despite its strategic location. The fungal forests absorb certain frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, Lyra explained as they prepared for descent. It creates natural dead zones for tracking technology. That's why it's become a haven for people running from corporations. "Where do we find Thorn?" Kale asked, initiating landing protocols. "There's a settlement in the northern continent, in a canyon called the Whisper Wind Gorge. It's controlled by a collective of corporate refugees and researchers. Thor maintains a lab there." Kale guided the Nomad through the atmosphere, following Lyra's coordinates. As they descended, the true scale of the fungal forest became apparent. Towering structures reaching hundreds of meters high, glowing with bioluminescent light in shades of blue and purple. They landed on a small platform carved into the canyon wall, barely visible among the natural rock formations. As the engines powered down, Kale performed a scan of the surrounding area. "No obvious surveillance," he noted, "but that doesn't mean we're safe. Xylos operates on trust networks," Lyra explained as they prepared to disembark. "Thorn won't meet us directly until he's verified our identities and intentions." "How does that work?" "We'll meet an intermediary first. Someone who can vouch for us." Kale frowned. "I don't like it. Too many variables." "It's how they've stayed hidden this long," Lyra countered. "We follow their protocols, or we don't get help." With reluctance, Kale secured the Nomad and accompanied Lyra and Alara into the settlement. The Whisperwind Gorge deserved its name. Constant winds channeled through the narrow canyon created an eerie, whispering background noise that made conversation difficult without raising one's voice. The settlement itself, was a curious blend of advanced technology and primitive construction. Dwellings were carved directly into the canyon walls, with flexible, synthetic materials stretched across openings to create weather barriers. Power came from wind turbines mounted high on the canyon rim, nearly invisible against the swirling clouds. Residents watched their small group with undisguised suspicion. Most wore practical, well-worn clothing similar to Lyra's, many bearing visible implants or prosthetics, marks of former corporate employees or test subjects. "Keep close," Lyra murmured. "Don't make eye contact too long." Kale nodded, keeping one hand near his concealed blaster as they navigated the narrow pathways. Alara walked between them, her unusual eyes drawing stares despite their precautions. A tall, slender woman with intricate silver circuitry visible beneath her translucent skin stepped into their path. "Lyra Maris," she stated without preamble. "You're expected." "Sil," Lyra acknowledged with visible relief. "Thank you for meeting us." The woman, Sil, studied Kale with cybernetically enhanced eyes that whirred softly as they focused. "This is your escort." "This is Kale," Lyra confirmed. These connected to the situation. Sil's attention shifted to Alara, and her expression changed subtly. "So this is the child." She knelt to Alara's level. "Hello, little one. Your arrival has caused quite a stir." Alara regarded Sil with curious intensity, but remained silent. "Dr. Thorne is waiting," Sil announced, rising. "But first, we must verify you weren't followed." She produced a small device that emitted a pale blue light, scanning each of them thoroughly. "No active trackers, but we'll need to take additional precautions with the child. Her energy signature is distinctive." Sil led them deeper into the canyon settlement, eventually arriving at what appeared to be a dead end. She placed her palm against a seemingly ordinary rock face, and a section slid aside to reveal a hidden passage. "Thorne's lab is below," she explained, gesturing them forward. The hidden passage led to a lift that descended deep into canyon rock. When the doors opened, Kale was surprised by the stark contrast with the primitive settlement above. They had entered a state-of-the-art laboratory, with equipment that would make even Omnicorp envious. A thin man with a shock of white hair and intense blue eyes looked up from a holographic display as they entered. "Lyra," he greeted warmly. "It's been too long." "Dr. Thorne," Lyra replied, obvious relief in her voice. "Thank you for seeing us." "How could I not?" Thorne's gaze shifted to Alara, scientific curiosity mingling with genuine wonder. "So this is Subject Chimera." He approached slowly, as one might approach a rare and dangerous animal. "Remarkable. The energy patterns are even more stable than your messages suggested." "This is Kale," Lyra introduced. "He's the interference factor I mentioned." Thorne's attention snapped to Kale, studying him with the same intensity he'd shown Alara. "Fascinating. No visible augmentations or unique characteristics, yet somehow you catalyzed the most successful Chimera subject to date." He circled Kale like a predator. "What makes you special, I wonder?" "I'm not special," Kale stated flatly. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Or perhaps the right place at precisely the right time," Thorne countered. He gestured toward a circular arrangement of diagnostic equipment. "Would you both consent to some basic scans? Non-invasive, I assure you. But if we're to understand this connection, I need data." Lyra nodded. "That's why we're here." Kale hesitated, suspicion overriding curiosity. "How do we know we can trust you?" "Omnicorp has resources. Everyone has a price." Thorne's expression hardened. "Omnicorp took my life's work and perverted it into weapons. Then they took my daughter for their experiments when I objected." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't have a price, Mr. Vance. I have a mission." The sincerity in Thorne's voice convinced Kale more than any logical argument could have. He nodded reluctantly. For the next several hours, Thorne conducted extensive scans of both Kale and Alara, occasionally asking questions about the rescue at the Omnicorp facility. Lyra filled in details from her perspective, while Kale recounted the specifics of his custom EMP device. "The timing was crucial," Thorne muttered, studying the results. Alara was at a critical formation stage when you initiated the EMP. The quantum matrix was still malleable, establishing its basic architecture. He manipulated a holographic representation of intertwining energy patterns. Your device created a harmonic resonance that stabilized the chaotic elements. And then your blood, the DNA, provided a biological template that the system incorporated. So, I'm what? Her biological father? Kale asked, uncomfortable with the implications. Not exactly, Thorne corrected. More like a reference point. A baseline that her system recognized as compatible and used to establish parameter boundaries. Without that reference, the Chimera subjects typically develop unstable cognitive patterns. They can interface with technology, but at the cost of their humanity. And the others? Lyra asked quietly. The other subjects? Thorne's expression grew grim. My sources inside Omnicorp confirm they've produced 7 more since Alara. All powerful, all unstable. They're being used for corporate espionage, system infiltration, even remote assassinations by manipulating critical infrastructure. Can they track her through me? Kale asked, the possibility suddenly occurring to him. It's possible, Thorne admitted. The connection works both ways, though Alara's abilities are far more developed. If they've analyzed the pattern of your interaction thoroughly enough, they might be using it as a tracing mechanism. As if summoned by the discussion, Alara approached the holographic display. She raised one small hand toward the swirling patterns representing her own neural pathways. The display responded, reorganizing to show connections that Thorne's analysis had missed. Extraordinary, Thorne breathed. She can see the patterns directly. Alara's fingers traced the connection points that linked her energy signature to Kale's genetic markers. Then, with deliberate movements, she began to modify the display, showing alternative configurations. I think she's suggesting a solution, Lyra interpreted, watching closely. A way to mask or alter the connection. Thorne nodded excitedly. Yes, I see it now. Not severing the connection that might destabilize her entire system, but reconfiguring it to create a false signature. Brilliant. How do we do that? Kale asked. It would require specialized equipment, Thorne began, but stopped as alarms suddenly blared throughout the lab. He rushed to a security console. Perimeter breach in the upper settlement. Unknown craft entered atmosphere 12 minutes ago. Omnicorp, Lyra asked, already moving to gather Alara. The pattern matches their stealth shuttles, Thorne confirmed grimly. They must have followed your trajectory and narrowed down the search zone. He began rapidly shutting down equipment. You need to leave. Now. We just got here, Kale protested. What about masking our connection? There's no time for the full procedure, Thorne said, retrieving a small device from a secure cabinet. But this might help. He handed the object to Kale, a metallic disc the size of a coin. It's a prototype quantum oscillator. It should create enough interference to mask Alara's energy signature temporarily. How do we use it? Lyra asked, already ushering Alara toward the exit. Place it directly against her skin, preferably near the base of the skull, Thorne instructed. It will synchronize with her neural patterns automatically. Syl reappeared at the lift entrance. Corporate forces have landed. Strike team of at least 12 operatives, heavily armed. They're conducting a systematic search of the settlement. Is there another way out? Kale asked, checking his blaster's charge. Thorne nodded, activating a hidden panel that revealed a narrow passage. This leads to a secondary exit on the far side of the canyon. There's an old atmospheric skimmer docked there. Not much to look at, but it will get you back to your ship. What about you? Lyra asked. I'll wipe the systems and join the evacuation, Thorne assured her. This isn't the first corporate raid we've endured. As they prepared to leave, Thorne grasped Kale's arm. The oscillator is only temporary. You need a permanent solution, such as the main Omnicorp database, Thorne said urgently. All Chimera data flows through their central research facility on Europa. If you could access it, you could potentially rewrite Alara's identification protocols, make her invisible to their tracking systems. Break into Omnicorp's most secure facility? Kale scoffed. That's suicide. Perhaps, Thorne acknowledged. but running forever is a slow death. He pressed a data chip into Kale's hand. This contains everything I know about the facility's layout and security protocols. It's not complete, but it's a start. The sound of distant weapons fire pushed the conversation to its end. Kale nodded, pocketing the chip as they hurried into the escape tunnel. The passage was narrow and roughly hewn, forcing them to move in single file. Kale led the way, with Alara in the middle and Lyra bringing up the rear. The quantum oscillator, now attached to the base of Alara's neck, emitted a soft blue glow that provided their only light. They had traveled perhaps half a kilometer when Alara suddenly stopped, her head tilting in that now familiar listening pose. "What is it?" Kale whispered. Instead of responding, Alara pointed to a seemingly solid wall to their right. Kale examined it closely and realized it was a carefully disguised junction that branched off from the main tunnel. "Another passage? Are you?" "Sure." Alara nodded firmly. "We should stick to Thorn's directions," Lyra cautioned from behind. A distant explosion shook dust from the tunnel ceiling. The strike team was getting closer. "I trust her instincts," Kale decided, helping Alara move aside the camouflage panel to reveal the side passage. The new tunnel was even narrower, forcing Kale to turn sideways at some points. After several tense minutes of uncomfortable progress, they emerged into a small natural cavern illuminated by the same bioluminescent fungi that grew above ground. "Now what?" Lyra asked, looking around the seemingly empty space. Alara approached the far wall, running her small hands over the rough stone until she found something that made her pause. She pressed firmly, and a section of rock slid aside to reveal a maintenance shaft lined with forgotten technology. This must connect to the old mining systems, Lyra realized. The first colonists on Xylos were mineral prospectors. They followed the shaft, which gradually widened into a proper tunnel equipped with ancient rail tracks. Eventually, they reached a junction with a platform that housed a small, dust-covered vehicle. An old maintenance cart, Kale identified, examining the controls. Might still work. After a few minutes of tinkering, the cart's electric motor hummed to life. They boarded quickly, Kale at the controls, and set off down the tunnel at a pace much faster than they could have maintained on foot. The tunnel system proved extensive, with multiple branches and levels. At each junction, Alara pointed without hesitation, guiding them through the labyrinth with inexplicable certainty. Kale didn't question it, whether she was sensing electrical systems, reading forgotten data, or following some instinct. Her directions had proven reliable. After nearly an hour of travel, the tunnel began to slope upward. Finally, they emerged through a partially collapsed opening into the fading daylight of Xylos. They found themselves in a deep side canyon, far from the main settlement. "The skimmer dock should be near here," Lyra said, consulting a small scanner she'd pulled from her pocket. They located the dock, hidden beneath an overhang of rock. The atmospheric skimmer Thorn had mentioned sat on the platform, an outdated civilian model with minimal weaponry, but decent speed. "Not exactly inconspicuous," Kale commented as they approached. "It doesn't need to be," Lyra replied. "Just fast enough to get us back to the Nomad." As they boarded the skimmer, the sound of engines overhead drew their attention. A sleek black shuttle passed over the canyon, its searchlights sweeping the terrain below. "Omnicorp," Lyra confirmed grimly. "They're expanding the search area." Kale powered up the skimmer, keeping it close to the canyon floor as they moved out. "We'll have to stay in the canyons as long as possible. The fungal forest should provide some cover when we break for the landing platform." The journey back to the Nomad became a tense exercise in evasion. Twice they had to power down completely and hide in recesses of the canyon walls as search parties passed overhead. Alara remained focused throughout, occasionally tapping Kale's arm and pointing to an alternative route moments before a search beam would have discovered them. When they finally reached the landing platform, Kale was dismayed to find an Omnicorp security team already examining the Nomad. "For operatives," he counted, observing from the cover of a fungal cluster. "Standard tactical formation. They haven't breached the ship yet. Can we take them?" Lyra asked, checking her stunner. We'd have to take them all down simultaneously, Kale replied. Otherwise, they'll alert the main force. As they considered their options, Alara tugged at Kale's sleeve. When he looked down, she pointed to her oscillator, then to the Nomad, then made a sudden outward gesture with her hands. I think she wants to use the oscillator somehow, Lyra interpreted. Kale frowned. Thorne said it masks her signature. How would that help us now? Alara repeated the sequence of gestures, more emphatically this time. Then she reached for the small toolkit attached to Kale's belt. Understanding dawned. She wants to modify it, turn it from a mask into a pulse. Lyra's eyes widened. Like your EMP device. She wants to recreate what you did at the facility. Kale hesitated. The oscillator is our only protection against being tracked. We're already found, Lyra pointed out. And if we don't get to the ship, it won't matter anyway. With reluctant agreement, Kale helped Alara remove the oscillator from her neck. Using his toolkit, the child made precise modifications to the device with surprising dexterity. How will we trigger it? Lyra asked when Alara indicated she was finished. In response, Alara placed the modified oscillator in Kale's palm, then touched his chest, near his heart. The meaning was clear. She would activate it. Through their connection. We'll need to get closer, Kale determined. Within 50 meters for something that small to affect their equipment. They circled around, using the fungi for cover until they reached the edge of the landing platform. Now only 40 meters separated them from the Omnicorp team and the Nomad. Ready? Kale asked, looking down at Alara. The child nodded, her violet eyes intensifying as she focused on the oscillator in his hand. Kale felt the now familiar tingle of their connection, stronger than before, a deliberate engagement rather than the passive link they'd experienced previously. The oscillator grew warm in his palm, its blue glow shifting to a pulsing purple that matched Alara's eyes. Suddenly, it emitted a silent wave of energy that rippled visibly through the air. The effect on the Omnicorp team was immediate. Their weapons, communications gear, and tactical visors all failed simultaneously. The operatives staggered, disoriented by the sudden loss of their technology. Now, Kale urged, sprinting toward the ship with his blaster drawn. Lyra followed close behind, stunner ready, while Alara remained in cover, as instructed. The first operative fell to Kale's precisely aimed stun blast before he could recover. The second managed to draw a backup weapon, but was dropped by Lyra's stunner. The remaining two, still disoriented, were quickly neutralized as well. Get the ship running, Kale ordered Lyra as he bound the unconscious operatives. I'll get Alara. Within minutes, they were aboard the Nomad, rushing through abbreviated pre-flight procedures as Kale initiated an emergency takeoff. The ship lurched skyward just as the distinctive whine of approaching Omnicorp shuttles reached their ears. Incoming from the north, Lyra called from the sensor station. To pursuit craft, weapons hot. Hang on, Kale warned, pushing the Nomad into a steep climb. The pursuit craft followed, their superior engines allowing them to close the gap rapidly. The first volley of weapons fire streaked past the ship, near misses that illuminated the cockpit with flashes of deadly energy. We can't outrun them to orbit, Kale realized, banking sharply toward the massive fungal forest below. We'll have to use the terrain. He descended rapidly, skimming just above the glowing canopy of the fungal forest. The massive structures rose like columns around them, creating a natural obstacle course that required all of Kale's piloting skill to navigate. The pursuit craft followed, their pilots equally skilled but hampered by their vessel's larger size and less responsive handling. One misjudged a turn and clipped a fungal tower, sending the craft spiraling into the canopy in a brilliant explosion. One down, Kale noted grimly, but the other one still on us. The remaining craft maintained pursuit, firing whenever it had a clear shot. A glancing hit rocked the Nomad, sending warning lights flickering across the control panel. Shields at 30%, Lyra reported tensely. We can't take another direct hit. Alara appeared in the cockpit doorway, her expression determined. Without waiting for permission, she approached the console and placed her hands on the navigation interface. The ship's systems responded to her touch, displays shifting to show a detailed analysis of the fungal forest structure. A new course plotted itself, heading directly toward what appeared to be a solid wall of fungal growth. "Are you sure?" Kale asked the child, who nodded without hesitation. Trusting her, Kale aligned the nomad with the suggested course, accelerating toward what looked like certain collision. At the last possible moment, a gap appeared in the seemingly solid structure, a narrow aperture barely wider than the ship itself. The nomad shot through the opening into a hollow space within the forest, a massive internal chamber where smaller fungi grew in concentric patterns around a central spire. The pursuers, unable to detect the hidden passage in time, pulled up sharply to avoid collision. "They're circling around," Lyra observed on the sensors, looking for another entry point. Alera's hands moved across the controls again, and the nomad responded by descending toward the central fungal spire. As they approached, what had appeared solid revealed itself to be another opening, a vertical shaft leading deep into the planetoid's crust. "Are you sure about this?" Kale asked, eyeing the narrow vertical passage with professional concern. Alera nodded emphatically, her fingers tracing a path deeper into the planet, then up toward a different exit point far from their current position. "She's found us a back door," Lyra realized. Kale rotated the nomad to align with the vertical shaft and descended carefully into the darkness. The ship's external lights illuminated a tunnel lined with smaller bioluminescent organisms that pulsed in response to their passing. They navigated through an intricate network of natural tunnels and chambers, Alera guiding them with unwavering confidence. After nearly 15 minutes of tense flying, they began to ascend through another vertical shaft. They emerged from a fungal forest hundreds of kilometers from their entry point, in a region of xylos marked by open plains rather than canyons. No pursuit craft were visible on sensors. "We've lost them for now," Kale confirmed, setting a course for orbit. "But they'll have the entire system on alert. Then we need to jump to hyperspace as soon as possible," Lyra said, already calculating potential routes. "The question is where to?" Kale turned to face her fully. "We can't keep running forever." Lyra's gaze shifted to Alera, who had slumped in exhaustion after her extended connection with the ship's systems. "No, we can't," she agreed softly. Thorn was right. "We need a permanent solution." Kale withdrew the data chip Thorn had given him. "Omnicorp's central research facility on Europa." "That's insane," Lyra protested, though without much conviction. "It's their most secure installation in the solar system." "It's also our best chance," Kale argued. "If we can access their main database, we can delete Alera's tracking signature and any research connected to her. Maybe even expose what they're doing with the Chimera project. It would take extensive planning, specialized equipment. We have something better," Kale nodded toward the sleeping child. "We have Alera." As the nomad broke orbit and prepared for the jump to hyperspace, Kale found himself contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. From solitary salvager to guardian of perhaps the most unique child in human history. The weight of responsibility should have terrified him, yet instead he felt an unfamiliar clarity of purpose. They would find a way to free Alera from Omnicorp's pursuit, and in doing so, perhaps he would finally free himself from the shadows of his past. After their narrow escape from Xylos, the Nomad limped through hyperspace with its systems operating at reduced capacity. The damage from the pursuit craft's weapons had affected more than just the shields. The propulsion system showed signs of instability, and the life support occasionally flickered when pushed beyond basic requirements. Kale spent most of his waking hours making repairs, often with Alera silently observing or occasionally assisting with her uncanny ability to intuit mechanical solutions. Lyra divided her time between analyzing Thorn's data chip and helping with ship maintenance, her knowledge of Omnicorp systems proving invaluable. 3 days into their journey, they gathered in the common area to discuss their next move. "Thorn's intel is extensive," Lyra reported, projecting a holographic schematic of the Europa facility. Security protocols, staff rotations, even some of the database architecture. "But it's incomplete," Kale noted, studying the projection. Entire sections of the facility are marked as unknown. It's still more than most people have ever obtained about an Omnicorp black site, Lyra countered. Enough to form the basis of a plan. The schematic rotated slowly before them, revealing a massive complex built into Europa's ice crust. Multiple layers of security were evident. A defensive perimeter of automated weapons platforms, biometric checkpoints, and constant surveillance by both AI systems and human security teams. The central database is here. Lyra indicated a heavily fortified core in the facility's center. All Chimera research flows through this node, including tracking protocols and biological signatures. So we need to physically access this database? Kale asked skeptically. The security looks impenetrable. Almost, Lyra agreed. But Thorne identified a potential weakness. She magnified a section of the schematic showing maintenance tunnels beneath the primary research level. These service corridors were part of the original mining operation that discovered the subsurface ocean. They were incorporated into the facility's infrastructure, but are rarely used except for major repairs. So we enter through the maintenance tunnels? Not exactly. Even those are monitored. Lyra manipulated the display again. But every 6 months, they perform a comprehensive systems diagnostic that requires powering down sections of the security grid sequentially. According to Thorne's data, the next diagnostic is scheduled in 2 weeks. That still doesn't get us inside the perimeter, Kale pointed out. No, but it creates windows of opportunity. Lyra highlighted various security nodes throughout the facility. Each section goes offline for approximately 17 minutes during its diagnostic cycle. If we could exploit those windows in sequence, we could leapfrog through the facility, Kale finished, seeing the potential. Each deactivation creating a path to the next section. Exactly. Even if we get inside, how do we access the database? I'm assuming it has its own security. That's where Alara comes in, Lyra said, looking at the child who had been quietly observing their discussion. The database uses quantum encryption protocols similar to those used in the Chimera project itself. Technology Alara can naturally interface with. You want to plug her directly into their system? Kale asked incredulously. The same system designed to track and control her? It's a risk, Lyra acknowledged, but also our greatest advantage. They won't be expecting one of their own subjects to bypass their security from within. Alara, who had been studying the holographic display intently, suddenly reached out to touch the projection of the central database. The hologram flickered, then reorganized to show pathways through the security system that hadn't been visible before, digital roads that connected various subsystems in ways that weren't immediately obvious. She sees the patterns, Lyra interpreted, the connections between systems that even Omnicorp's engineers might not fully understand. Kale watched the child's confident manipulation of the hologram with a mixture of awe and concern. She seems sure she can do this. The question is, can we get her there safely? Lyra's expression grew troubled. This isn't just a dangerous mission. We're talking about bringing a child into a heavily militarized corporate black site. I don't like it either, Kale admitted. But what's the alternative? Keep running until they eventually catch us? Watch her grow up, always looking over her shoulder. The words surprised him as they left his mouth. The implicit acknowledgement that he was now thinking long-term about Alara's future, about watching her grow up. When had that shift occurred? Lyra seemed to notice the change too, a faint smile crossing her features before she returned to the tactical discussion. If we're going to do this, we need resources we don't currently have. Specialized equipment, current access codes, maybe even inside help. I might know someone, Kale said reluctantly. A contact in Jupiter's orbital network. Specializes in corporate intrusion tools. Not cheap, but reliable. Can this contact be trusted? Jax doesn't have loyalties, only prices. Kale shrugged. And he hates Omnicorp more than most. They seized his shipping business during their expansion into the outer system. Then that's our first step, Lyra decided. We get the tools we need, then time our approach to coincide with the system diagnostic. As they continued planning, Alara remained focused on the holographic facility, her small fingers occasionally adjusting details or highlighting specific areas. Her silent intensity was a constant reminder of what was at stake, not just their safety, but her future. Later that night, as the ship's lighting dimmed to simulate evening, Kale found Alara still awake, staring out the viewport at the streaking lights of hyperspace. He sat beside her, following her gaze into the swirling chaos. "You should get some rest," he said quietly. "We have a long journey ahead." Alara turned those unsettling violet eyes toward him. As had happened several times before, Kale felt the strange sensation of communication without words, impressions rather than language. But this time, the impression was clearer, almost like hearing her voice in his mind. "Are you afraid?" Startled, Kale almost pulled away. Had the connection between them strengthened, or was Alara simply growing more adept at using it? "Yes," he answered honestly. "I am afraid. What we're planning is dangerous. Maybe impossible." Another impression formed. Curiosity, questioning. "Why am I helping?" Kale interpreted. He considered the question seriously. At first, it was just about getting away from trouble. Then, I don't know, responsibility, maybe. He paused, organizing his thoughts. But now it's more than that. You deserve a chance at normal life, whatever normal means for someone like you. Gratitude washed over him, a warm sensation unlike anything he'd experienced before. Then something else, determination, resolve, and beneath it all, a child's simple trust that adults would make things right. "I'll do my best," Kale promised, finding he meant it completely. "We both will." Alara nodded solemnly, then surprised him by leaning against his side, her small form relaxing as exhaustion finally overcame her. The Nomad arrived at Jupiter's orbital network 6 days later. The massive gas giant dominated the viewport, its swirling storms and majestic bands of color a stark contrast to the utilitarian structures of humanity's industrial presence. Dozens of stations, refineries, and docking platforms orbited at various altitudes, connected by shuttles and transport tubes, a thriving ecosystem of commerce and corruption. Jax operates from a modified habitat ring in the lower industrial sector, Kale explained as he guided the Nomad toward a cluster of weathered structures on the outer edge of the network. It's technically outside corporate jurisdiction, though everyone pays someone for protection. "Will he recognize your ship?" Lyra asked, preparing the docking protocols. "That's the idea. If we try to approach anonymously, his automated defenses will target us before we can identify ourselves." They docked at a shabby but functional private berth that Kale accessed with an old authorization code. After securing the Nomad, he outlined the plan. "I'll meet with Jax alone first," he said firmly. "He's paranoid about new faces, and bringing a child would raise too many questions." "I don't like splitting up," Lyra objected. "Neither do I, but Jax won't deal if he feels cornered." Kale checked his blaster and concealed it under his jacket. "Stay aboard. Keep the engines ready. If anything feels wrong, take off immediately." Lyra eventually agreed, though her reluctance was obvious. As Kale prepared to leave, Alara approached him with unusual directness. She placed a small hand on his arm, and he felt her impression in his mind, a warning mixed with concern. "I'll be careful," he promised. The habitat ring that served as Jax's base of operations was a patchwork structure of interconnected modules, each added over decades as needs changed. The atmosphere inside was thick with the scent of recycled air, machine oil, and the distinctive odor of illicit substances consumed by those seeking to forget their circumstances. Kale navigated the circular main corridor with practiced ease, acknowledging familiar faces with minimal gestures. The unspoken rules of places like this were clear. Mind your business, maintain awareness, and never show weakness. He reached a nondescript door marked only with a small geometric symbol that changed daily, Jax's simple but effective security system. Today's symbol was a triangle bisected by a curved line. Kale pressed his palm against it and waited. After several seconds, the door slid open to reveal a cluttered workshop filled with disassembled technology from a dozen different systems. In the center, a wiry man with extensive cybernetic augmentations around his eyes and along his arms worked on what appeared to be a modified security drone. "Vance," the man acknowledged without looking up. Heard you'd gone legitimate. Salvage contracts and transport runs. Things change, Jax, Kale replied, stepping inside as the door closed behind him. Now Jax did look up, his cybernetic eyes whirring softly as they focused. Yes, they do. For instance, you're now on Omnicorp's priority target list. Quite the bounty, too. Kale's hand drifted toward his concealed weapon. That a professional observation or a personal interest? Jax laughed, a sound like grinding gears. Relax. If I wanted the bounty, we wouldn't be talking. He gestured toward a less cluttered area where two mismatched chairs faced each other. So, what brings a newly minted fugitive to my humble operation? As they sat, Kale assessed his old contact. Jax had added more augmentations since they'd last met. New interface ports along his left forearm, and what appeared to be enhanced respiratory filters visible at his throat. The modifications were high quality, but not showy. Functional improvements rather than status symbols. I need intrusion tools, Kale stated directly. Corporate grade, specialized for Omnicorp systems. Current protocols, not outdated patterns. Jax's mechanical eyes widened slightly.